Hello, everybody. Yeah, it's a real pleasure. I'm really glad to be introducing John, and glad that so many people are here. John Gallas is a poet of both sides of the globe. He was born in 1950 in Wellington, New Zealand, where I gather it's also currently just after 7 o'clock, but 7 a.m., not p.m. But he's long lived in England, currently in Leicestershire, though he makes very frequent trips to the Lincolnshire Fens, where he keeps a little caravan in a place called Sutton St James. He's published a lot, over 30 books of poetry, many of them with Carcanet. Billy Nibs Buckshot, The Complete Works, is a book of tankers, nearly 200 of them, and it's beautifully presented as always with Carcanet. Each poem's given its own page and is fully deserving of that. It's many things, but it's a zany book. The back cover blurb rightly celebrates what it calls crazy and merry variety. But yeah, crazy and merry variety. But it's also often a meaningful and perpetually a memorable book. I'm quite an admirer of John's poetry and a huge one of this particular book. I'm now going to pass to John so he can share some of it. Then I'll come back and we'll have a chat and open things up to questions. So yes, if you have any questions for John, please put them in the Q&A using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll come to as many of them as we possibly can. But for now, over to you, John.
Right, I'll just say a few very quick things before I start reading from Billy Nibs. It's a book, as Rory said, of 198 tankers. A tanker is originally a Japanese form, now pretty universal, which depends on syllables. So each little poem is 5, 7, 5, 7, 7 syllables. So a little bit like a haiku for somebody who's got rather too much to say. So we'll be able to get through quite a few of these because they take about 15 seconds each to read. So that's number one. Number two is that the tankers and the poems in this book are not about me. Where there's an I, it probably isn't me, but it might be, but it's irrelevant. Thirdly, the tankers, therefore, because of that withdrawal of me, are for you. They're for the reader and they're for the listener. And not particularly for analysis. They depend on the effect they make as they're read, as I hope we'll discover. Lastly, Billy Nibs himself is quite simply a Dada joke. He has no connection at all with the contents, unless, haha, you want him to. So I shall read 30 of these tankers. I have a small bell, which I shall ring between each one so that we know we're moving on to the next. And I shall also quote the number from the book of the selected tankers that I'm reading. Number one, Hi. I can't stand flying. All that scary bouncing around. The soar, the plummet. It wears me out. I don't think I can love you much longer. Number 9. Lowestoft, midday. Lowestoft, midday. 2 lifeboats leave the harbour, burbling side by side. Far out, against the world's blue wallpaper, I watch them part. Number 13. Growing up. Dad planted the old gnarly pine when I was born. By night, the cones sing. By day, the tops reel in mist. How come it's bigger than me? The power station. Ratcliffe. Steam balloons off the cooling towers. Across Remembrance Way, it pales and fades. Where shining sleeps Ralph, the alabaster night. Number 16, catalepsy. A trumpet winds jazz somewhere. I can't move, extinct in the small, dark hours. Distant scales tickle my ears. Good, I'm asleep, but not dead. Number 25, the rook. A Collingwood rook sits up a gum tree and gleams. I get my phone out. He hides in the leaves and squawks, "Nolly me tangerine, mate." Number 27, long love, or alternatively, book love. There you were, and I remembered how I loved you and cried at the end. You were with somebody else, a little battered. Ah, Tess. Number 31, reverie. I lay on the hill and chewed a haystalk. The clouds outcompassed like some requisition of the sky. I'm tired of great causes. 37, the voice. When I pump up the old accordion, it hoots and squeals and sighs with merry anticipation. Are you in there, my darling? 43, Eastertide. I ride at Easter down Mole Drove. The hawthorn bends and drifts to the high cow parsnip, whose snow again makes white winter of the road. 44, a caravan in the woods. Who knows what he loved? He seemed content in his old yellow caravan, quiet as a deer, and on cold days, a thin wave of smoke. 47, on cold. I watch frost spreading on the hedges. 3 a.m, a tallow-faced moon. On the whitening lawn, 2 owls hold each other in their wings. 50, autumn. Let's go for a walk in the park and look at the dying hydrangeas. The paths are foggy. Autumn keeps us close in a shared coat. 67, flutterby. The manuka bobs. A wee piwakawaka perks and zips away to more promiscuous grub trees. Bark dust bursts from the spurned branch. 68, drowned. At 6:30, I always think my clock is dead. So limp the dropped arms, like poor drowned Percy, hanging in the water, tired of time. 74, alone, naturally. You left me last night. I sat in the bath and ate crisps. My toothbrush snapped. Well, I hope you find what you're looking for. Probably mice. 79, the third degree. If pillows could talk, I sometimes wonder who would really be bothered to interrogate them by the light of the bedside lamp. 87. Like. Shall I compare thee to a simile, in whose ballroom of romance the clamouring components of the world find company? 98. A new me. Who could have thought that I would ever be a tree, and freed at last from roaming, wave my clattered arms in a flurry of red leaves? 103. The Heafy track. Rain clatters on the heaving Nikau umbrellas. A leaden sea swarms at the shore. A track winds on far into the spindrift. Good. 111. Fiskerton. Yes, I remember Fiskerton, the name, because there was a small owl standing on the platform with a paper bag on its head. 114. Cave. Hang on, mate, I think there's a wetter on my head. Pew pew, shade the pool. I lap water in the dark, nodding my huge antennae. 122. Little Wanganui, and this tanker is for Fleur. Once I fell asleep in Little Wanganui. The spring whitebaiters swung their nets like giant sails, and my head lay in a pawa. 144. Winter. Now the watchful hare sniffs the night. Haws and blackthorns bleed in the hedgerows. Nettles rot. The land is bare. Light seeps from the moon's white round. 147. Karamea Beach. I'm the first thing here since it snowed. Superstitious of perfection, I walk in the dunes and watch the white beach unroll beside me. 154. Joke. A Scotsman, a horse, a piece of string, a giraffe, a man with a dog, 2 penguins, a sandwich, and a nun go into a bar. 157. Datelines. Everything comes first to the good folk of Tonga, from where it proceeds west in a Mexican wave to the world's less happy lands. 173. Nocturne. Tonight I wander by the noctilucent shore to see the black swans towering in their love rage, slinging flakes of silver light. 185. Festo. This one needs a small explanation. It's written in Esperanto and has been checked by the Esperanto Society of Great Britain. And for those of you who unbelievably don't know who Jamie Vardy is, he is Leicester City's striker and star of forever. Ho, Jamie Vardy! Ni amas vin en tute. Dankon pour ciao. Specife to abrila golo contra Liverpool. 194. An encounter with love. I saw Dan Cupid buzzing round the black birches near Tapawera. I asked him what he doth there. D'ye know Nan Spragg? He piped. 195. War and Peace. The war canoes of Laufoli churn overhead. Their dark bellies cleave the green sky. Swish, shush. Now the sea floods with sunlight again. 198. Runes. So I'm going to die. No pain, it says here. Just a dissociation by degrees, and then a pale poof. I'm looking forward to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. Very much enjoyed that. John sent me a message earlier that said that the bell was working, and I had no idea what he was talking about, but it soon became apparent, didn't it? But yeah, thanks, John. I'll just say if anyone has any questions for John, please put them in the Q&A. We've got plenty of time, so we should be able to get to most of them. You said at the beginning, John, a haiku for someone who hasn't much to say. That's what you said at the beginning.
Oh, sorry.
Describing...
No, I meant to say a haiku for somebody who...
Oh, sorry. No, I meant who has too much to say. What did I just say?
Yes.
Who hasn't got... Yeah. No, quite the opposite. Yeah, a haiku for someone who has too much to say. 5 lines, of course. Elephant in the room question to start about form. Why tankers? What drew you to a Japanese form, a syllabic form in the first place, and why that particular syllabic form, not the shijo or something?
I think after the last book, which was a very personal book of love poetry, I wanted to step back and do something which was more of an exercise. That wasn't the main reason for the form, however, because most of my poetry is written in a form. And in this case, what I wanted to do was to have a form that didn't include rhyme, didn't include any of the, English traditional or European traditional ways of romantic poetry, that is rhyme and rhythm and a certain form. But the verse form with syllables seemed to fit very well. What I wanted to do was, I find it very difficult to not modify anything that I first think I'm going to turn into a poem. So the initial eruption of thought, feeling, or belief, or passion, or whatever it is, always in my case needs or comes to have some sort of form, which, tones it down, puts it in a proper perspective for me, and therefore in a funny sort of way distances me, I think, a little bit from the poem. And I've taken that to extremes in this one by saying that most of the poems aren't about me and they're for the reader, and I've distanced myself from them. So the tanka was perfect for that because it's a syllabic form, doesn't require any of the traditional rhymes and rhythms of European poetry, and yet is quite a strict form. And also you can do nice things with it. You can have line by line, or you can jump the lines over, or you can mix the syllables up, but it's got to be very, very strict, and they all are. So it's a sort of distancing technique in a way, but not an unusual one for me, just a different one.
Sure. Yeah, and I know you happened on writing them in a sense, I suppose, more than anything. But you evidently stuck very much stuck with it. I suppose it's basically impossible to be anecdotal in a haiku, isn't it? And you're quite the anecdotalist. So did that play into?
Well, I think sometimes you have poets all have little books of or brains full of the tiny little things that they always meant to write and they never quite sort of got round to it. Just tiny little things, and suddenly you realise when you start off with a few tankers and then do a few more that you can do the lot. You can get these all in, give them a nice little form, and then pass them on to a reader without actually having to emote or tell a reader what you believe or what you think should be right, or even, this is how I feel, or this is what I want to tell you. It's just an image or a scene or a little something, which in a way doesn't even really bear analysis. The effect of these, I hope, and I hope very much for the reading, is that they have their effect instantly, and they have their effect as any way that the reader wants them to, and that's what I like, and that's part of the distancing again from myself as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the back cover blurb, and you can judge a book by its cover, by the way, but the back cover blurb says readers begin tankering as soon as they close the book. I sense I might be wrong, but I sense the wit of a certain Mr. Schmidt lurking in that description.
Yeah, you're right.
Um, it's obviously a joke, but all the same, has writing these 198 tankers and presumably some others you left out had any transformative effect on the way you think about writing poetry now? It takes a year or so for a book to come out, right?
I didn't actually leave any out. What I did was I started, and I thought, oh, I've reached 198 now, I'll stop. So it could have gone on and on and on, but it reached a point where that was enough. And also for me, that way of writing was enough. And the next book, hopefully, is something so completely different from Tankers that
198 sestinas, is it?
I no, it's much freer and much weirder, but still has form tucked in there somewhere, which I always do. The
So,
personal,
oh,
sorry,
sorry.
the
No,
personal
carry
thing
on.
is a funny matter that I wanted to do very much in this book. I once went to a an exhibition of art in, I think it was, Sydney Art Gallery, and they were experimenting, and they had this exhibition which had no attributions, no notes. You didn't know who had painted or done anything. You didn't know if they were famous. You didn't know if they were by a 5-year old. You didn't know anything. And if there was any clue on the painting, it was discreetly sort of covered over. And in the final room, they asked people, what they liked best and why. And people generally felt, not always and not all of them, but a majority felt that they were left slightly freer to make up their own minds, because they weren't being led in any sort of way. And that's a very roundabout way of saying that that is the sort of gallery I would quite like these tankers to be hung in. That they're just there, and people can pass in front of them and look at them and choose the ones they like best, and they don't need any input from me. They don't need to know anything about me, and they don't need to know anything about what I think or feel or believe or my habits or anything like that. I mean, obviously, they come from my brain, so the only personal mental furniture that's in action there is me. But that's not pushed. That just is.
Yeah, but there's a filtering, at least ostensibly, isn't there? Because as Billy Nibs Buckshot, right? What made you want to sort of project your poems in this way to the extent that you did? You said it's a Dada joke, and sure, but could you say a bit more about the title? It made me think of initially, straight away, made me think of the complete poetical works of T.E. Hume, right? The the five imagist poems of Hume's that Ezra Pound stuck in its own section at the back of ripostes, but those were Hume's, and these minimalist poems are yours, and yet they're also the complete works of Billy Nibs Buckshot. There's got to be something to say about that, John.
No, no, no. Truly, 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 it is a joke. And it was originally going to be called, pardon the not very good pun, "Here They Come, 200 Tankers Delivering Goodness Fresh to Your Doorstep." But I was cycling around the wash, as I do quite often, and I was overtaken by a supermarket van whose slogan was "Delivering Goodness Fresh to Your Doorstep." So I thought, well, we can't do that.
You
And then
might get sued.
I asked for a picture of Mr. Foursquare, who's a New Zealand cartoon advertising a supermarket, and he wears an apron, he's got slick back hair, and he's going thumbs up and things, and it's great. It's an iconic little cartoon. And they said no. So no, I didn't have a title and I didn't have a cover. So really, I did it back to front. I chose a picture. I thought, oh, that looks like somebody from a Western. Let's call him Billy Nibs, and let's pretend he wrote the poems. So it actually worked backwards rather than forwards.
Yeah.
And it has no connection at all, unless the reader wants to have one. I mean, it's impossible that somebody, for instance, from that period would have written these poems, or whatever. No, it truly is. It remains just a joke, but it fits in with my idea that I want these poems to be not me pressing upon the reader in any way.
Julia Craig McFeely has a question that takes us back to, I guess, to form to some extent. But did you find yourself, or how you wrote them anyway, did you find yourself unconsciously rhyming and have to stop yourself?
No, I think again that was because of the last collection, which was very John Donne-like, or I tried to make it very John Donne-like. That was the method by which I kept a romantic book of love poetry in check, which I always like to do to some degree. So I didn't. No, I managed to cut myself off from that one completely and tried to do something new and found it very comfortable, and therefore there was no tendency to rhyme. And I think if you did by mistake in a haiku, and suddenly you thought, oh, line 2 rhymes with line 4 or something like that, it would be too much. You'd be having a form with a rhyme on top of it. And if it ever did happen, and I can't remember it ever happening, but it may have done, I would have changed it for another word that had the same syllabic value but didn't rhyme.
Yeah, I can think of poets who've done that very consciously with haiku. Paul Muldoon's Hopewell haiku, or X.J. Kennedy translations of Basho, I think, where he makes them rhyme. I suppose he's a new formalist, but yeah, I tend to agree with you. There's a question here about New Zealand, from Richard Bolly. Lots of references to New Zealand, John. Great. What does it mean to you currently? What does New Zealand mean to you
Oh,
currently?
goodness.
Yeah.
uh, a great deal. I mean, it's the land of me until I was 21. So most of the things that are in my brain and have sort of flowered or weeded or done whatever they do from that have all come from those beginnings. I went home regularly every single school holiday year for 16 years. So I've crossed the world sort of 32 times. I've slowed down a little bit now. That doesn't mean I don't miss it. I do, but I also think that it's possible to be extremely happy in two places, which is an unusual response, I think. The idea is usually that one is melancholy for one or the other. But heavens, you can get on a plane and go there and do the things you want to do. But yes, you have to choose one of the two to live in. And at the moment, I'm living here, but I am very susceptible to anything that sort of pops up and suddenly grabs you from far away. I remember, for instance, sitting in the huge cinema in Edinburgh to watch the last Lord of the Rings film, Return of the King. And about halfway through, I think there's some elves passing through a forest, and suddenly there's a bellbird. And I found these tears sort of, in my eyes in the cinema. And it passed, but it was a sound that sort of brought an awful lot back. So all those things that are there are there. And they pop up and they pop down and they make me happy. They don't make me particularly sad, even though sometimes you do weep. And they mix beautifully with England. I mean, I love England and I love Lincolnshire and I love New Zealand as well. And if it would be possible to have two hearts or two roots or whatever it is, I would do it. I always think that if you have two roots, then, you can grow something that goes all the way around the world.
Well, yeah, I mean, other places come into the book, but unsurprisingly, I think of you primarily as a poet of, I guess, rural Eastern England and of New Zealand, and that's very much borne out by the book. Deeping St James, where you have your caravan, in the Lincolnshire Fens, that gets a couple of mentions, for
Yeah.
instance. But what draws you, a poet from notoriously pancake flat New Zealand, with all of its famous medieval buildings, to places like Glinton with its fenny surrounds and needlepoint medieval church spire? Do you think one half of your identity has much impact on the other in your work? I suppose that's what I'm asking.
Well, I suppose you often want what you haven't got. And then once you're there, you want to go back to what you had before. And finding a balance is therefore very important for human happiness, I think. So therefore, yes, obviously that would have an influence on what I write as well. I mean, I'm not a personal poet, so not a particularly, or not always a particularly personal poet. So I wouldn't tackle something like the melancholy between two countries or anything like that. Specifically in poetry, I would probably put it in the mouth of somebody else, or dress it up in some sort of little drama that took place, say, in Lincolnshire or in New Zealand, which I've done quite often. I've written poems about things that have happened to me in Lincolnshire, but they're like stories. And I've written poems about things that happened to me in the New Zealand bush when I go back. But again, they're often small stories that aren't concerned with me and my thoughts and feelings particularly, or at least well disciplined.
Yeah, I mean, Sherry Ashworth asks, what are the places that were important to you in the writing of this collection? I think we've covered that, unless there's anything else you want to say in relation to
No,
that, actually.
I mean, I think I spotted Dave and Irene popping in there, and they are the caravan site in
Oh,
Lincolnshire, for which I'm eternally grateful, because it's a place that I don't write. I go for 2 days every single week of my life, every week of the year, and I have 2 days cycling, and call in on friends on the way home. And obviously, I don't actually write there, but obviously things happen. Um, Delightful, minor, small things which I delight in, that quite often become poems. And in a funny way, a collection of haiku was perfect for that, because of lots of little, something happens every time you go out on the bike for a day. And when you collect them all together, you don't want to make a big thing of it, because it isn't a big thing. And a haiku or a tanka are just right for that sort of thing.
subtle and well formed, like the landscape in which they were birthed or ingested, I suppose.
Yeah.
There's a question that connects to, yeah, you said you're not very much in the poems. David Knotts says, I was amused that you saw yourself as, quote, not in the poems, as they all seemed very personal and very you. Do you think it's important for creative people to be at a distance from what they create?
I would not make a general comment. It is for me.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way I do it, and I feel uncomfortable if I don't do it that way. It's not that I don't want to, pardon the expression, I don't want to expose myself. It isn't that at all. It's just, this is the way I do it. And when it comes out in the way that I do it, I think, yes, that's right. Now, who knows why, and who knows where, and who knows what goes on. And David's right. I mean, the tankers are me, but that can be all sorts of things. That can be a smile. That can be a whimsical little something. That can be a, keep your chin up sort of thing. That can be this. That can be that. And then it can be punctuated with things that are actually quite mournful, or an image that's very, very striking because I saw it and it was striking, and I simply tried to reproduce it. So yes, I mean, it is me, but it isn't. It isn't my emotion.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. And yeah, I probably agree with you. Robin Marsack says it's about shaping the the volume. Did you throw them all up in the air and put them in a random sequence, or is there anything structured about the sequence?
Oh
Um, yeah,
God,
New Zealand pops up now and again, says Robin, at regular or irregular intervals?
nope,
Question mark.
they are precisely and exactly in the order that I wrote them.
Wow. Okay. That's how
Uh,
you do it, folks.
I kind of like that because it means that I'm not looking for resonation. What's the word? Resonations,
Resonances, yeah.
resonances between them that have been manufactured by me. Any resonances that happen belong happily to the reader or the listener. I wouldn't want to group them according to how I thought they were effective, because that effectiveness means nothing to a reader. They won't get it. They will make their own on the way through. Um, I read, is it Roland? Do you say Bart? Roland Bart.
Well, I would, but I'm from Lincolnshire, mate. I don't know.
So Roland Bart wrote an essay called "The Death of the Author," which fascinated me and stuck with me. And he proposed the idea that if you got rid of a bit like the Australian Picture Show, that if you got rid of all details and just didn't know who'd written this, where they came from, whether it was a translation, um, anything at all about the author, what period it came from, or anything, and you've just read it, then you're thrown completely on your own resources. You haven't got any sort of input from what you feel you ought to think about it. It's just your opinion. And that struck me very strongly in relation to this collection. I'm not always that absent, but it seemed to fit this collection very well.
Yeah, what does he say at the end? Something like the price of the birth of the reader is the death of the author or something. But you tempt us, don't you? Because I mean, okay, we now know how it came about, but I mean, this is called the complete poetical work, the complete works of Billy Nibs Buckshot, and there's a bloody picture of him on the front there, John. So you're definitely encouraging us to believe that on some level these are
Well,
the
I
musings
did
of a.
at one point say to Michael Schmidt, please, could I publish this anonymously? And he said, don't be silly. So it's not published anonymously, but I would have been perfectly happy if it had been. Um, I don't. Yeah, I mean that's it's as simple as that. I would. It doesn't reflect on me. I mean, I suppose it does in a way, but I wanted it not to. I wanted it to be at that sort of distance, and it would have been quite fun to have it as the complete works of Billy Nibs Buckshot, and then perhaps the reader could have done a bit of hopeless research into who Billy Nibs Buckshot was, because he wasn't, and what he did and why he would be likely to write such a collection of poems, which of course is impossible.
There's yeah, there are clear allusions in well to all sorts of poets throughout the collection: Tennyson, Clare, Plath, Blake, Yeats, Edward Thomas. The poem you read, yes, I remember Fiskerton, but only because the speaker's seen an owl with a paper bag on its head at the station. Um, I'm not sure quite what to make of some of these allusions. They're often pointedly kind of pathetic, I suppose, but ever so enjoyable. You can be very funny sometimes in a subtle, sometimes sort of pratfallish way. Maybe it's just me, but I take your line, quote, "Windows weeping old man's beard" in the poem "The Corset Factory." Um, well, I know what it means, but of course, it also makes me think of old men's faces glaring into the windows of a corset factory, which,
Yes,
um,
which is what it was.
on the back cover, on the back cover, Bill Manhire calls you mischievous. How important is it to you in these poems to, well, to be mischievous?
Heavens, I mean, he also says the most audacious poet I know. I mean, I consider myself to be dead traditional, and I mostly rhyme. I judged a poetry competition about 3 months ago, and there were 340 entries, and one of them rhymed. So I'm quite an old sort of traditional poet in many sort of ways. Mischief is great. I mean, I think most of the poems that you referred to in relation to other poets
Yeah,
um, were probably because that day I was leafing through something and I came across, a Plath or a Bishop or one of those sort of poems and thought, oh, that's fun. I could do a little something on those.
yeah,
And they're not critical. And yes, I mean, mischief is a way of admiring something without being serious about it. And I do
yeah. I
admire
think
all
it
those.
certainly can be, can't it?
Um,
So, oh, that links. This links to that really, Jack. Um, oh no, I'll go back a question. Sorry, I missed one. Janet Wilson. Does the tanker mode allow you to express romantic slash anti-romantic love more than other types of poem?
no, I don't think so. I think in many ways the fact that I chose the tanker specifically not to write that type of poetry, having done that in the last volume, The Ecstasy,
Yeah,
um, I think love poetry is a thing of its own. I could make a few comments about love or see some things that would lead me to do a very brief reflection in the tanker, but I wouldn't begin to express feelings of love of my own in a tanker because it would take me a bit longer and I would need, therefore, more formal things or formal options to either take in or reject or to use or to half use or whatever to try and make a whole out of the poem. And I don't think I could make a whole um, out of 5 lines.
yeah, yeah. Understood. Jack Harlot says, I heard, if you have any questions, by the way, now's a great time to pop them in because we're going to be ending quite shortly. But Jack Parlett, excuse me, says, I heard a comic sensibility in quite a few of the poems you read. Do you think there's a relationship between the tanker as a short form and humour?
I think there can be, yes. I mean, let's take haikus because more of them
Mm,
are known and more people have written them. But obviously, it's very, very similar. Um, a basho haiku can be very serious. It can be a description of nature. It can be a little meditation on leaving home or missing the person that you love or something like that. Um, and these are delicious and delightful and in their way perfect. That's another thing I haven't mentioned actually. It is possible to finish a haiku in a tanker and think, because you've done the syllables right, that's perfect. So it is an encouraging form at the same time. Um, so those sort of haikus were also reached the point where they can be treated humorously. Is it Roger McGough that's brought out a series of cat haikus, which are very funny indeed? And I think there does reach a point where, and these are two different things, I think, where they're parodiable. And I'm not quite sure that would happen to a tanker because it's not quite so short and so popular. And haikus have been parodied a long, long, long time. Um, so I think that, I think being being funny is something that I don't set out to be. I think my character does certain things when I'm writing in a limited space. That means that I keep using the word merry, which is very old fashioned, but it's the sort of feeling I have when I write a tanka that or a poem that has a positive view of life, really. And that just means sort of sunshine, nice things happening. And there's nothing particularly horrible in any of the tankers. And if there is, it's a cat or a mouse or a toothbrush or a bag of crisps.
Yeah, there's sort of vulnerabilities, aren't there? I mean, I'm thinking, I can't think of the poem now, but where he's sitting in the bath with his toothbrush or whatever. I mean, it's both funny and vulnerable.
Yes, yes.
But
Well,
I,
I'm getting old, so that's part of the mental furniture as well. That as you get older, these sort of slightly melancholy things pop up now and again, and you either go for them or you put them in their place. And I think probably amongst the tankers, there will be ones where I've gone for the melancholy um, by trying to pretend it's not actually me, or I've sort of treated that melancholy in a light-hearted way, either through myself or through somebody or something else.
yeah, I think they're wonderful poems. They really are.
Thank you.
And it was great to hear them tonight and to have the palate cleansing of the bell between each one. Um,
Thank you very
I'm
much.